Jiang Tingyue was willing to give up everything in order to love Fu Nansheng, until she realized through a divorce agreement that his preferences were all fake. Later on, the bright and proud Miss Jiang no longer existed. As she stood on a tall building and looked at the man who had hurt her deeply, she finally felt a hint of revenge. Fu Nansheng, if I die, will you remember it for a lifetime? The man stared fixedly at the woman in front of him and yelled uncontrollably, I'll give you whatever you want. Originally, he also had moments of panic, and they finally came to an end. She is the red rose nurtured by him, which will eventually wither in his palm. Rose lives to death, willing to be reduced to dogs and horses. Bright and delicate Miss Times retreat revenge for the new noble keywords of the novel. Rose Canine and Horse no pop-ups, Rose Canine and Horse TXT complete collection download, Rose Canine and Horse latest chapter reading. Chapter 1. Nourishing Red Roses. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 1 Nourishing Red Roses Charm Colored Club, Late Night Private Rooms. Jiang Tingyue was locked up in a messy private room for 4 hours, and there was finally some noise coming from the door. The person who opened the door respectfully shouted, Mr. Fu. With a few clicks, all the lights in the private room lit up, shining brightly in Jiang Tingyue's eyes. It was only then that she could see several bloodstains on the blanket on the ground, and her pupils slightly contracted. Fu Nansheng sat on the sofa opposite her. The man had long legs overlapping and was only wearing a white shirt. His sleeves were rolled up to his elbows, revealing his thin and powerful arms. He looked at the woman in front of him indifferently and said, Enough trouble. Jiang Tingyue's mouth twitched with a hint of mockery as she lifted her eyes and said, Did I make a scene? His voice was extremely cold. Qin Rou's hand had 2 stitches sewn. You also injured my benefactor, it's even now. After speaking, Jiang Tingyue saw disgust, disdain, contempt, and despicability in Fu Nansheng's eyes. Jiang Tingyue once loved him so much, but now she hates him so much. The perfect husband who once cared for her was just his disguise, and now Fu Nansheng is his true face. He stepped on the Jiang family and successfully rose to power, becoming a rising star in the business world of Linen City. However, she went from being the richest woman to selling herself in a club. She was so destitute and miserable, thanks to him. Now, he still condescends to come and entangle with her, and I don't know which one is wrong. Fu Nansheng, you have obtained everything from the Jiang family, and I have also left the house to sign a divorce agreement with you. What else do you want? Jiang Tingyue can only think of him, which is that he has come to settle accounts with her for his beloved Su Qin Rou. You figure it out, tonight she is the one who is causing trouble for me. She has been spending so much time with him here, not eating all night, and drinking alcohol. At this moment, her stomach ache is severe. Fu Nansheng saw her dressed in cool clothes, her hands covering her stomach, and her gaze fell on the wine glass on the table. Under the bright light, there were red lips on the edge of the glass, and the suit that was originally draped on her body was also thrown to the ground. She just flirted with the old man under this guise. He sneered, if Jiang Jin sees her daughter searching for the gold lord in a seductive manner, should she praise your filial piety, or will she scold you for being unfilial? Jiang Tingyue was so angry that her chest was heaving. She stood up with a suspender skirt that only reached her thighs, and her legs were thin and straight under the skirt. She was angered and said, In my eyes, they are all more straightforward than you. I would rather sell myself than beg you. She could endure not begging him for 3 months, which he didn't expect, but he never liked to extend the hunting time. Fu Nansheng lit a cigarette and calmly started smoking. Jiang Tingyue disliked the man who smoked the most, and the man who had never touched a cigarette in front of her before had a familiar and enchanting smoking posture. She was choked by the smoke and couldn't bear it anymore. She walked out without hesitation. Have you scraped together enough medical expenses? He casually dropped a sentence that was enough to make her stop. Jiang Tingyue's drooping hands gradually clenched, her heart trembling, and the image of her father lying in the operating room came to mind. She raised medical expenses every day, and before anything happened, she could squander it recklessly. She had no concept of money, but now she understands that without money, her father would die. The pride and dignity she once had were trampled on by Fu Nansheng. Fu Nansheng pinched her 7 inches, but still didn't appear anxious. He smiled lightly and said, "I have always been very patient with you." Jiang Tingyue felt nauseous and said, "I can't bear it. Now that Mr. Fu is high and mighty, why bother to exterminate me as an insignificant person?" Fu Nansheng smiled and extinguished his cigarette butt in the ashtray. The red rose he nurtured in his hand bloomed even more brilliantly and charming, with more thorns. Jiang Tingyue only felt that he was becoming increasingly sick now. His gaze at her was no longer the same tender and affectionate as before, but more like a venomous snake that had been poisoned, biting her and not letting go. Fu Nansheng came to her and pinched her chin, forcing her to look up. "If we recognize reality earlier, we should suffer less, right? Is this a disguised threat?" Jiang Tingyue found his words extremely ridiculous and looked at him directly. "Have I suffered less in the past 3 months?" Her eyes showed hatred towards him. "Even if I sell it to another man, I don't want to give you a discount." Fu Nansheng's eyes suddenly sank, and Jiang Tingyue felt relieved to see his gloomy expression. She left the private room in front of him. Jiang Tingyue returned to her own apartment and rented a 1-bedroom, 1-living-room apartment. The space was only as large as the place where she used to put her bags, and there was not much furniture at home. She had already discounted everything she could sell. Jiang Tingyue took a stomach medicine and rested directly on the sofa. The medicine didn't take effect so quickly, causing her to spasm in pain and her thin body to shrink into a ball. From childhood to adulthood, she has had smooth sailing and can easily get anything she wants. She is the princess of the Jiang family, and many people envy her as the richest woman in Linen City. However, she unfortunately fell for Fu Nansheng. She believed his oath and sweet words, and foolishly thought he only loved her. But all of this is fake. He doesn't love her at all, he loves Qin Rou. She closed her eyes, frowned tightly, and the thin sweat on her forehead wetted her bangs. That night, she slept extremely restlessly. The next morning, Jiang Tingyue was awakened by the ringing of her phone. She glanced at the phone number and instantly lost her sleep. It was the phone from the hospital. She quickly went to the bathroom to wash up, but was shocked by the makeup on her face, like a ghost. She quickly removed her makeup, changed clothes, and rushed to the hospital. Jiang Tingyue was pushed back to the hospital room after receiving emergency treatment. The nurse saw Jiang Tingyue only arriving and spoke in a tone that was not very good. "Miss Jiang, please pay the fee quickly. The hospital is not for charity. If you don't pay the fee in full, we will have to let your father be discharged. I will gather the expenses as soon as possible." "You always say that, but you don't necessarily have to pay in time," the nurse muttered. "Is it really charity to treat a hospital like this?" Jiang Tingyue clenched her hand, her fingertips turning white, and she didn't say anything. She stepped forward to look at Jiang Jin, and with sharp eyes, she noticed that her father had bruised the back of his hand after receiving an 4-drip. Reading Guide 1. The male lead is not a good person, and he will continue to pursue his wife at the crematorium. 2. Both the male and female leads are not perfect personalities, and the female lead will grow in the future. 3. Don't give a low score casually. The author is not easy to code. I hope everyone can give a 5-star rating with their fingers. 4. The plot of this book is compact, extremely pulled, and constantly reversed. Welcome to the comments section to explore the plot. 5. Seeking collection, tickets, comments, and more. We will continue to accompany everyone with our new article in 2023. Love you all. End of this chapter. Chapter 2. Why argue with her? You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 2 Why argue with her, what's going on? Jiang Tingyue asked coldly, just because I didn't pay the fee on time, did you treat it differently? Which time did I fail to pay? The nurse's eyes dodged. This is very common, not a big problem. It's very common, right? How about asking other patients if they would do this? We didn't mean it, why are you so aggressive? The nurse was still feeling a bit guilty, but thinking that Jiang Tingyue was dressed simply and didn't have any money, she instantly straightened her waist. If you want to complain, go complain. Jiang Tingyue laughed angrily and said, it's reasonable for you, an intern nurse, to get the wrong needle. Of course I will file a complaint. If you don't have good skills, just learn it and come back. The intern nurse never expected that the person lying in the hospital bed at this moment was the richest person of the past. The dean personally came to apologize to Jiang Tingyue, and both inside and outside of these words, he didn't want to make a big fuss. Jiang Tingyue couldn't help but hear that he was trying to protect himself. Dean Jiang, not to mention that my father previously invested in the hospital and has been supporting you, but now that he is sick, he doesn't even have basic protection for a patient. In the past 3 months, Jiang Tingyue has suffered countless cold eyes and a bleak world. Miss Jiang, I have been under pressure to let your father live here. Director Jiang hesitated. Now the person in charge of the hospital is Mr. Fu. If Mr. Fu agrees, everything will be easier, right? Why don't you just go find Mr. Fu? Jiang Tingyue didn't respond and asked her to beg Fu Nansheng, but she didn't want to. Remember to pay the medical expenses this month in a timely manner, otherwise the hospital will only allow your father to be discharged. Director Jiang is only responsible for bringing the words to, and the rest has nothing to do with him. In the ward, Jiang Tingyue sat in a chair beside her, holding Jiang Jin's hand and bowing her head without saying a word. After a while, she looked up and her eyes turned red. Dad, can you wake up quickly? I won't be able to sustain myself anymore, and you won't be willing to leave me alone, will you? She said. Jiang Jin had no reaction and lay there lifeless, wearing an oxygen mask. Jiang Tingyue lay by the bed and cried. When she walked out of the hospital, her eyes were swollen like walnuts. Without paying attention, she stepped on the empty steps and fell to the ground in embarrassment. It has been proven that when a person is unlucky, everything goes against them. Jiang Tingyue covered her ankle, bent down in pain, and her face turned white in waves. In the distance, there was a black Bentley parked, and bodyguard Io witnessed the whole process. He was ready to get off the car and touch the handle, but the man in the back seat did not speak for a long time. Io turned around and asked tentatively, Mr. Fu, Miss Jiang has fallen. Well, I see it. Well. Io looked puzzled. Do you want to go down and help Miss Jiang? Fu Nansheng casually played with the delicate lighter in his palm, caressing the smooth surface of the metal with his thin lips slightly raised. Do you think she can hold on for a few more days? Io thought for a moment and said, Miss Jiang may not easily compromise. So, disobedient people always have to endure more hardships in order to long remember. Fu Nansheng looked out the window with a slightly cold expression. What did Dean Jiang say? Miss Jiang said she will scrape together the medical expenses. That means she won't come begging him anymore. Fu Nansheng pursed his thin lips and said, that will make it impossible for her to get together. Io nodded and agreed, I understand. Drive back. Io sat up straight, with a short gaze in the distance, and immediately drove away. Jiang Tingyue didn't notice Bentley passing in front of her at all. She slowed down for a long time, her fair face covered in sweat, and she stood up supporting the railing. She tried to stand straight with her right foot on the ground, but it hurt as soon as she moved. She can only seek help from passers-by to help her enter the hospital for registration and treatment. The doctor originally suggested that she be hospitalized for observation, but Jiang Tingyue requested medication. By the time she limped out of the hospital, it was already late at night. She disregarded her foot pain and went to the seductive sex club. Sister Hua. Stop. Mother Sanghua didn't let Jiang Tingyue continue, and she couldn't help but say, don't say anything, leave. Jiang Tingyue's beautiful eyes were filled with tears, and her hopeful gaze was moist as she looked at Hua Jie. She was originally a top-tier bone beauty, and any glance could captivate the soul, making her a perfect match for both men and women. Hua Jie originally hoped that she would make a lot of money, but she didn't expect to lose her job. This is not suitable for you. Sister Hua took a puff of smoke, flicked the ash with her red nail polish finger, and exhaled a long puff of smoke. I have nothing to do with him, Jiang Tingyue denied. Sister Hua crushed the cigarette and looked at her, don't you understand? If you want to sell it, you can only sell it to him. Jiang Tingyue was stunned, and Hua Jie stood up to leave, not forgetting to give her advice. Instead of dealing with those stinky men, it's better to follow someone with power and influence. At this moment, Jiang Tingyue truly understood that Fu Nansheng was determined to embarrass her and return to his side in this humiliating way. Fu Nansheng returned to the Yunlin villa, and Qin Rou had already sat on the sofa waiting for him. He took off his suit jacket and threw it aside. Qin Rou stood up and came to him, taking off his tie. Her hand was still wrapped in gauze, making it difficult for her to move. Fu Nansheng's palm covered her hand. Take a good rest after sewing the needle. Fu Nansheng turned around, loosened his tie, and sat on the sofa. Qin Rou lowered her eyes and glanced at her left hand. My hand hurts a lot today. Jiang Tingyue wants to destroy my hands. Do you know how important hands are to a designer? Qin Rou closed her eyes and her voice was muffled. Ah Sheng, can my hands be restored? Fu Nansheng took her other hand and Qin Rou sat beside him. Did you apply medicine today? He asked gently. Well, there are those who apply medicine on time and those who take it on time. Qin Rou looked at him with a gentle expression, but it still hurts. Fu Nansheng smiled at her, his handsome face seducing her. He was already extremely good-looking, and when those affectionate eyes looked at you, her heart softened instantly. Jiang Tingyue is arrogant and domineering, why bother arguing with her? Qin Rou looked at him, feeling very satisfied and said, yes, I shouldn't care. What qualifications do I have? Not everyone is like Jiang Tingyue, a young lady born with a golden key. When you are with her, don't you also spoil her endlessly and let her create things? How could she not act coquettishly and seek comfort from her? Fu Nansheng pursed his lips tightly, appearing unhappy. Qin Rou decided to speak his mind clearly and clearly. You divorced Jiang Tingyue, why bother taking care of her? Ah Sheng, as you said, you acted on the spot for Jiang Tingyue during those 3 years. You weren't attracted to her, and you wouldn't get back together with her, would you? End of this chapter. Chapter 3. Even if you die, you won't go back. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 3. Even if you die, you won't go back. These are not things you should worry about. Fu Nansheng lit a cigarette, and the smoke filled his handsome face, blurring it. Go back and rest early, I'll let Io see you off. Qin Rou remained motionless as Fu Nansheng finished smoking a cigarette. You are incomparable to Jiang Tingyue, you are more important than her. Fu Nansheng's voice was low, and just this sentence made Qin Rou happy. She turned to his side, hugged his neck with both hands, kissed his side face, and squinted with a smile. As long as it's what you say, I believe it. Fu Nansheng curved his lips and said, then be good and don't argue with me. I see. Qin Rou wrinkled her nose and felt good. Then you should rest early too. I'll go back. Qin Rou reluctantly let go and carried her bag out of the villa. Io was responsible for taking her back. Dong dong dong. Open the door. Jiang Tingyue couldn't fall asleep after coming back from the club last night and tossed and turned until the latter half of the night. While she was sleeping soundly, someone knocked on the door early in the morning. She covered her ears with a pillow, but the person outside was still pounding desperately. She lost her pillow and got restless. Her foot injury had not yet healed, so she could only jump and open the door. The landlord saw her coming so slowly to open the door, and his tone was very aggressive. "Oh, the little girls nowadays are getting lazier and lazier. I've been knocking on the door for so long, you've only opened it. Auntie, it's 7 o'clock in the morning now. Do you have anything to do?" Jiang Tingyue became even angrier. The landlord snorted and said, "I won't rent this house anymore. Please move out as soon as possible." "Oh no, move tomorrow. We signed the contract." "I'll pay you the penalty for breach of contract," said the landlord's aunt with a smile on her face. "I'm going to rent this house to someone else. Please move quickly and don't affect others move in. Even so, you have to say hello to me in advance. If you want me to move out tomorrow, where should I go to find a house? I don't care about this. Anyway, the penalty for breach of contract will be paid to you. You should leave quickly. No moving." Jiang Tingyue pretended to close the door, but the landlady blocked her in time with her hand. "I said, why are you so young and don't understand? This house belongs to me, not to you." Jiang Tingyue gave her a cold look and said, "It's the first time I've seen someone so happy to pay a penalty for breach of contract." The landlady was stunned for a moment. "You can reserve at least 1 month for me." "No, the other party said you must move out within a day." After speaking, the landlady covered her mouth and saw that the words were leaked, so she stopped hiding. "They offered me 3 times the price, but I can't refuse. I'm already soft enough to let you leave tomorrow. You can go out and find a house today." Jiang Tingyue slammed the door shut, ignoring her foot pain as she returned to her room and picked up her phone to dial. Fu Nansheng was in a meeting, and the director of the planning department was reporting. The phone on the desk shook, and he glanced faintly. He didn't answer it, and then a second call came in. He raised his hand to stop it, and the director of the planning department stopped. "Everyone, take a 5-minute break first." I.O. opened the glass door and the conference members left one by one. Fu Nansheng only picked up the phone, and as soon as he put it to his ear, he moved it away. "Fu Nansheng. Are you sick? If you are sick, go see a doctor. I have nothing to do with you. Are you disgusting all the time? Is that interesting?" After she finished scolding with a crackling sound, Fu Nansheng put his phone back to his ear and said, "Are you finished scolding?" "No." Jiang Tingyue was unhappy. "You're not finished, you're still not a man. Shaming me like this can give you a sense of achievement, right? Qin Rou can't satisfy you anymore. You have to find other women, and there are also many who are in the best position with your current status. Are you interested in Huohua? Am I a man? Aren't you the clearest about it?" Jiang Tingyue was about to be refreshed by his audacity. "What exactly do you want?" Fu Nansheng spoke calmly, "Return to the villa by the water." Upon hearing about the Linshui villa, Jiang Tingyue was almost heartbroken. The Linshui villa was their wedding home, and Jiang Tingyue had lived there for a whole 3 years. Now, at first glance, it was just a dream woven by Fu Nansheng for her. It was ridiculous that Fu Nansheng had left her with the Linshui villa after divorce, leaving her with nothing but a clean house. The clubhouse, hospital, and now forcing her to move. He has done everything in his power, using all sorts of dirty methods on her. "In what capacity will you go back?" Jiang Tingyue asked in reverse. Fu Nansheng tugged his lips and sneered lightly, "Whatever identity you think it is, it is." "Ha, Fu Nansheng, you're really..." Jiang Tingyue gritted her teeth and said, "You're crazy. I won't go back even if I die." Fu Nansheng supported his chin with his fingers and smiled lightly, "Really? You will go back?" Jiang Tingyue really wanted to hang up the phone, but now she's alone. She can't compete with Fu Nansheng. He's now a rising star in the business world in Linen City. She has begged her father's former business friends, but they all refuse to see her. Everyone is following Fu Nansheng's lead, and it's easier for her to ask him directly. She can't compromise any further and send it to Fu Nansheng to play with. They should just die of old age and not interact with each other. Fu Nansheng, do you insist on forcing me? Are you willing to let me go as long as I die? Jiang Tingyue. His voice was cold and hard. If you die, everyone around you will suffer. How about burying them all with you? Jiang Tingyue's breathing increased a bit, and Fu Nansheng glanced at the time on his watch and said, if you move to the Linshui villa today, your father's medical expenses will be transferred to the hospital. You are so angry that you want to waste time with me, and I have plenty of time to play with you. But you have to think, can your father afford it? The more stubborn you are, the more he will have to bear it for you. After speaking, Fu Nansheng hung up the phone and continued the meeting he had just interrupted. Jiang Tingyue sat by the bed, her eyes turning red as she couldn't compromise. Fu Nansheng firmly believed that Jiang Tingyue would obediently return home. Even if she were a woman, she would not be able to make much trouble, and she had no choice at all. He was busy until the evening when he was free. After signing the last document, he got up and put on a suit jacket. As soon as he arrived at the underground parking lot, he caught a glimpse of a familiar figure. Weak, helpless, and pitifully huddled in the corner. However, he didn't have much compassion. Fu Nansheng looked down at the woman squatting by the wall with a calm expression and said, how long do you want to squat? My feet are numb. Jiang Tingyue still hung her head down, her feet were painful and numb, and she couldn't stand up at all. I would rather squat in the underground parking lot and wait than go back to the waterfront villa. Jiang Tingyue, is your backbone used in these useless places? I'm willing, she murmured. Fu Nansheng didn't bother her anymore and walked straight towards Bentley. Io opened the rear car door and bent down to sit in. Io hesitated a bit and said, Mr. Fu, Miss Jiang. Don't worry about her. These 4 words impartially reached Jiang Tingyue's ears. She stood up against the wall and walked towards him with a limp. She stood outside the car, biting her lips and saying, Fu Nansheng, can we have a talk? End of this chapter. Chapter 4. Do you want to kill me? You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 4. Do you want to kill me? He turned his head and said, it's just that back and forth. Is there anything new? You can't do this to me, Jiang Tingyue tried to reason with him. I swear, I won't appear in front of you in the future. Can you? Hold your hand and let me go. Fu Nansheng felt that Jiang Jin had not taught her how to negotiate terms with men. She also pampered her from a young age, clean as a blank sheet of paper, and like an idiot. Jiang Tingyue thought he had overheard, I'll go far away. Fu Nansheng climbed up the car window directly, and Jiang Tingyue wanted to speak. Io reminded him on the side, Miss Jiang, are you getting in the car? She hadn't finished speaking yet, but she didn't want to get in the car. Fu Nansheng angrily called out Io's name, and Jiang Tingyue quickly got in the car. Along the way, Fu Nansheng didn't pay attention to her. No matter what she said, he didn't respond until the car entered the courtyard of the villa by the water. It wasn't until Jiang Tingyue realized that all her efforts were futile. Jiang Tingyue stood at the entrance of the villa by the water, hesitating to enter. She was extremely repulsed by this place, and those memories she wanted to forget always emerged, clearly telling her what kind of man she had fallen in love with, and how this man had taken his place step by step, devouring her home. When she turned around to leave, the door opened and Mrs. Chen happily stepped forward and grabbed her hand. Mr. Fu, madam, you are back. Fu Nansheng responded calmly, leading the way to the door. Chen's sister-in-law spoke enthusiastically to Jiang Tingyue and led her into the villa. Jiang Tingyue stood at the door, unwilling to move any further. She withdrew her hand and said, "Chen's sister. Law, I'm divorced from him. You don't need to call me that again." Mr. Fu said, "You are the hostess of the villa by the water, at all times." Jiang Tingyue's face was very ugly, and Fu Nansheng undoubtedly wanted to humiliate her. "I made your favorite pastry for you, come in and try it." Sister Chen, with great strength, pulled Jiang Tingyue in 3 times and brought out a flour cake from the kitchen. "The red roses in the yard are in full bloom, and I have brought some to make flour cakes for you to try." Chen's sister. Law still treated her like before, and her eyes were always affectionate like those of a child. Jiang Tingyue hated Fu Nansheng, but couldn't hate Chen's sister. Law. She picked up a flour cake and tasted it, which was still the same as before. "It's very delicious," she said. Fu Nansheng answered the phone and kept talking, only to catch a glimpse of her awkward expression and restless sitting. Mrs. Chen poured a cup of flour tea and placed it next to her hand, only to find that she was now thinner than before. Her arms were too thin, so thin that it was heartbreaking. "Madam, why have you lost so much weight?" Jiang Tingyue took a bite and put down the flour cake. "Sister Chen, don't call me that in the future, just call me Miss Jiang. Otherwise, I will have a burden. She doesn't need anyone related to Fu Nansheng to treat her well." "Okay, Miss Jiang." Mrs. Chen sighed slightly. Jiang Tingyue accidentally knocked over a teacup, causing tea stains to splash onto her white shirt. Chen's sister. Law quickly helped her wipe it off. "These clothes are all dirty. Please go upstairs and replace them with new clothes. I cleaned the cloakroom on time." "No need. These clothes are all wet, it feels uncomfortable to wear them on." Jiang Tingyue couldn't resist Sister Chen, so she went upstairs to the master bedroom. It was still the same as before, but at this moment, her mood was extremely desolate. Everything here was hand-picked and arranged by her. It used to be so beautiful, but now it's so ironic. Even if it doesn't change here, she and Fu Nansheng can't go back in time. Jiang Tingyue lowered her eyelashes and went to the bathroom to wash her white shirt hem. Half an hour after Fu Nansheng finished speaking on the phone, he saw that there was no one in the living room and asked Mrs. Chen, "Where is she?" "Miss Jiang is washing up in the master bedroom." "Miss Jiang." Upon thinking about it, Fu Nansheng realized that the title of Mrs. Fu probably caught her off guard. He went straight upstairs, pushed open the door of the master bedroom, and it was quiet inside. He walked in, but didn't see Jiang Tingyue. Then, the sound of water came from the bathroom. He lit a cigarette and waited for her. After a while, the bathroom door opened. Fu Nansheng turned his head and his gaze fell on her, not on any glamorous scene. He immediately withdrew his gaze and continued smoking, slowly exhaling smoke. Neither of them spoke first. Jiang Tingyue walked over to take the cigarette but from between his fingers, bent over and crushed it in the ashtray. Her black and smooth long hair hung down on her chest with her movements. His eyes darkened, and he pulled her arm, holding her in his arms and pressing her onto the sofa. In a whirlwind, she was pressed under Fu Nansheng's body, and then a hot and dense kiss fell on her lips. She tasted the smoke, as well as the familiar refreshing taste on his body. She struggled, her mouth making a whimpering sound, but the man grabbed her shoulder, tossed and turned to kiss her, suck on her soft lips, and take her breath away. Jiang Tingyue reached into the depths of the sofa with her back hand, touched the hidden Swiss military knife, and without hesitation, stabbed at him. Even though Fu Nansheng reacted quickly and dodged in time, his arm was still cut by a small knife, and then blood oozed out, staining his white shirt red. Jiang Tingyue fell off the sofa and sat on the ground, tightly gripping her small knife with both hands, looking alert and resistant. The tip of the knife was still stained with blood, but her face turned pale. "Do you want to kill me?" Fu Nansheng stared at her and asked her coldly and indifferently. "I." Jiang Tingyue shook her hands in fear. Even though she was prepared in her heart, she couldn't help but feel scared. She had never hurt anyone, let alone stabbed someone with a knife. Her red eyes forced her to calm down. "Say it, are you trying to kill me, Fu Nansheng didn't care about this minor injury and instead chuckled lightly. "It seems that I underestimated you. Even rabbits in a hurry can bite people. You dare to take a knife now? Fu Nansheng, don't force me." Jiang Tingyue grabbed the knife with even more force. "From the moment I signed to divorce you, I have nothing to do with you. I don't want to go back to the Linshui villa, nor do I want to entangle with you anymore." Fu Nansheng looked at her expressionlessly, wanting to hear what else could be said from her mouth. "After tonight, I won't owe you anymore." After speaking, Jiang Tingyue cut her wrist. She, who was born afraid of pain, was willing to accept this blow in order to leave Fu Nansheng. Fu Nansheng stepped forward and grabbed the small knife, throwing it aside. He grabbed Jiang Tingyue's cheek and said coldly, "Do you think this can bring us to an end? I tell you, Jiang Tingyue, even if you're dead, you have to stay by my side. Playing suicide with me is useless." Jiang Tingyue gave a pale smile, with no expression on her face. "Really, I think it's good to die without seeing you." After speaking, her breath was weak, and her thin body was about to collapse. Fu Nansheng quickly hugged her, realizing for the first time that her body was so light. Her wrist was still dripping blood, dripping down the floor along her fingers. He picked her up horizontally and quickly walked down the stairs. Chen saw that both of them were stained with blood and was so scared that she covered her mouth. "I was fine just now, why did I see blood soon? Io, drive to the hospital." When Fu Nansheng came out holding Jiang Tingyue, Io saw her tightly closed eyes, looking lifeless. Io ran through a red light all the way and arrived at the hospital at the fastest speed. Jiang Tingyue was taken to the operating room. End of this chapter. Chapter 5. I will go back obediently. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 5. I will go back obediently, Mr. Fu, your arm is also injured. Let's go treat the wound first. Io doesn't know what happened to the two of them, but now it seems difficult to make Miss Jiang willingly return to the Linshui villa. Fu Nansheng had a calm face, his white shirt stained with blood. "You stay here and guard." Io lowered his head and said, "Yes." A few hours later, Jiang Tingyue was pushed out of the operating room. Her wrist was wrapped in thick gauze, and her other hand was dripped. She was taken to the VIP ward, and for several days, Jiang Tingyue remained unconscious. She refused to wake up, as if trying to escape. Doctors tried various methods, but none of them worked, and her desire to survive was very low. Fu Nansheng became angry about this, and even after replacing the medical team, his patience was worn to the end. He simply said in front of Jiang Tingyue that he would remove his father's oxygen mask and bury her together. Io noticed that Jiang Tingyue's finger moved and said, "Mr. Fu, Miss Jiang has a reaction." Fu Nansheng glared at the doctor team and said in an unpleasant tone, "What are you doing in a daze? Hurry up and save someone." In the evening, Jiang Tingyue slowly opened her eyes, feeling weak and powerless. She realized that she had been saved and was still alive. Poochie. The sound of the lighter flipping over. The flames ignited and extinguished, repeating this process. Jiang Tingyue turned her head and met his gaze. Fu Nansheng continued to play with the lighter, his gaze fixed on the blue and gray flames that lit up, and the light reflected on his handsome face. However, Jiang Tingyue dared not look directly at him, closed her eyes, and set her head aside. Smoke lingered in the ward, and Jiang Tingyue was choked to the point of coughing, causing a sharp pain in her wrist. "This is the hospital," she couldn't help but speak, her voice weak. Fu Nansheng remained indifferent and waited until he finished smoking a cigarette before getting up and shouting for Io. Io pushed the door and entered. "Mr. Fu. Jiang Jin is upstairs, isn't he?" Io paused and said, "Yes, it's in room 602 upstairs." Fu Nansheng saw Jiang Tingyue open his eyes and looked at him with a frightened expression. He curved his lips and said, "Since his daughter doesn't care about him even if she wants to die, then let's fulfill her." Fu Nansheng. Jiang Tingyue sat up, enduring the excruciating pain of her wound. She grabbed his arm randomly, her eyes turning red, and choked up, "No, no." She tightly gripped his shirt, tears streaming down her face. Fu Nansheng looked at her from a condescending position. She was as fragile as a porcelain doll, but he didn't show much pity for her. "Why are you crying?" "I'm not trying to please you and make you worry-free," he said. "Aren't you willing to die to draw a clear line with me?" Jiang Tingyue just cried. "When I was at the villa by the water, wasn't it very tough?" Her crying echoed throughout the ward. "What are you doing in a daze? Why don't you do it?" Fu Nansheng's tone intensified. For Fu Nansheng's words, Io never disobeyed and walked out of the hospital room. "Don't." Jiang Tingyue finally pleaded with him, "Fu Nansheng, please let Io come back. Hurry up and let him come back." Seeing that begging him was useless, Jiang Tingyue pulled out the needle and was about to get out of bed, but was pinned by the man on the bed. "Aren't you trying to get rid of me?" "I'm giving you this opportunity," he said. Jiang Tingyue struggled hard and said, "Fu Nansheng, let go of me. I gave you a chance." After speaking, Fu Nansheng let go and Jiang Tingyue ran out of bed. She rushed to the upstairs ward, where Io was about to remove Jiang Jin's oxygen mask. "Stop it." Jiang Tingyue rushed into the hospital room and pushed Io away heavily, opening her hands to block him. "I don't allow you to harm my dad." Io did not step forward again. Fu Nansheng stood at the door, looking at these two people. He looked at Io with a smile on his face and said, "Why, you can't even move a woman now. Miss Jiang, please make way." "I won't." Jiang Tingyue refused to leave. "I'm sorry, Miss Jiang." Io could only subdue Jiang Tingyue's hands, try to avoid her injured wrist, and then push her aside. Jiang Tingyue was not his opponent at all. With a gentle push, she stumbled back and fell to the ground. She wanted to get up and stop him, but Fu Nansheng grabbed her unharmed hand and didn't let her come forward. "Stop it." No matter how Jiang Tingyue shouted, Io couldn't hear him. She knelt beside Fu Nansheng, shaking his arm and shouted at him in a mournful and desperate tone, "Fu Nansheng, I beg you, please make Io stop quickly. I'll listen to you. Whatever you ask me to do, I'll listen to you." Io directly pulled off Jiang Jin's oxygen mask, and the indicator beside him began to make a beeping sound. Jiang Tingyue widened her eyes in fear, and she became even more anxious as she slapped Fu Nansheng, crying and pleading with him, "I was wrong. I was wrong. I will never commit suicide again. I will return to the villa by the water, I will obediently go back. Please." Fu Nansheng remained unmoved, while Jiang Tingyue listened to the dripping sound. Every second was agonizing. She let go of all her pride and compromised, tears streaming down her face. "I will stay by your side until you're tired." Jiang Tingyue cried and bent down to plead with him. Fu Nansheng lowered his eyes with a cold expression and said, "Remember what you said today." Jiang Tingyue nodded frantically with tears in her eyes, and upon receiving her response, Fu Nansheng asked Io to call a doctor. Io quickly pulled back the oxygen mask, then rang the call bell, and soon the medical team rushed to the ward to rescue Jiang Jin. Jiang Tingyue collapsed on the ground with tears on her face. Fu Nansheng picked her up and walked out of the hospital room. She didn't want to leave, but Fu Nansheng said, "If you listen, he can be safe and sound." She obediently lay in his arms. Fu Nansheng carried her all the way back to the hospital room and asked the nurse to bandage her wrist injury again. Jiang Tingyue remained motionless and obediently let people play with her. He saw that her slender ankle was swollen and bruised, and she ran recklessly despite the injury. The ankle wound is also treated together. Ah. The nurse didn't react, and Fu Nansheng furrowed his brows. If you don't know how to do it, then switch to a professional. The nurse didn't dare to say much, so after wrapping up the wound on her wrist, she went out to call a professional doctor. The doctor treated Jiang Tingyue's foot injury. She was not fully recovered before, but now she has moved her muscles and bones. Now she needs to rest for a longer time. Miss Jiang, you need to pay attention to your rest recently. Don't do any more vigorous exercise, otherwise it is easy to leave sequelae. Jiang Tingyue has been practicing dance since childhood and attaches great importance to her legs. She will be especially careful not to hurt her feet. If there are any sequelae, can she still dance in the future? Fu Nansheng saw her pitiful and drooping face, asking the doctor, will it affect dancing? As long as you pay attention to rest and don't get hurt again during this period, it shouldn't have much impact. I will also keep an eye on Miss Jiang's condition on my end, the doctor said pleasantly. After the doctor left, there were only the two of them left in the ward. Jiang Tingyue couldn't help but say, I want to go see my dad. How did the doctor explain it just now? Fu Nansheng felt that she would never have a long memory. So you want to become a cripple? Jiang Tingyue will cry or not, afraid to scold him or say anything, afraid that he will go crazy and go to Huahua her father. End of this chapter. Chapter 6. Treaty of Humiliation. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 6. Treaty of Humiliation. Chen Saw tidied up Jiang Tingyue's clothes and cooked soup. Fu Nansheng's phone rang, and he went outside to answer the phone. Miss Jiang, Mrs. Chen took out the insulated box and stepped forward. Jiang Tingyue wiped away the tears from her cheeks, causing pain in her hands and feet, everywhere, which made her so uncomfortable. Mrs. Chen quickly sat down by the bed and saw her wrist wrapped in thick gauze. She was filled with heartache and earnestly advised, Miss Jiang, no matter what, you can't joke about your body. It hurts so much to hurt yourself. Even if you feel wronged, don't confront Mr. Fu head on, otherwise it's still you who got hurt. Mrs. Chen lowered her voice a little, Mr. Fu, whether you eat soft or hard, just follow him, just follow him. In those 3 years, I was able to pretend flawlessly and obediently to her. Now that I'm not pretending anymore, I want her to follow him and please him. Jiang Tingyue thinks it's a pity that Fu Nansheng won't become an actor. She hung her head and remained silent. Mrs. Chen knew that she wouldn't be able to hear for a while, and that some things needed to be taken slowly and adjusted. After finishing speaking on the phone, Fu Nansheng turned around and entered the hospital room. Mrs. Chen was feeding Jiang Tingyue soup, and she was sipping it slowly. He immediately remembered how she used to be so tenderly fed. In terms of coquettishness, Jiang Tingyue ranks first, and no one dares to rank second. Fu Nansheng picked up the suit jacket placed on the sofa and walked out. As soon as he left, Jiang Tingyue breathed a sigh of relief. Mrs. Chen, my dad is upstairs and I want to go and see him. Mrs. Chen looked embarrassed. Miss Jiang, this matter needs Mr. Fu's consent. Please take good care of yourself first. I just want to know about my dad's situation. Okay, can I help you go up and take a look? Jiang Tingyue felt very down and could only nod in agreement. After Chen's sister Law went to visit Jiang Jin and informed her that she was out of danger, Jiang Tingyue finally felt completely at ease. Early morning. Jiang Tingyue was awakened by pain, with a faint pain in the wound on her wrist. She didn't feel the weight of the knife last night, and now the pain is unbearable. She opened her eyes and was about to call the nurse when she saw the man sitting next to her. When did he come? Fu Nansheng sat leisurely on the sofa, gesturing to Io standing next to him. Io came forward with a document and placed it on the bedside table. Jiang Tingyue sat up with difficulty, her face still a bit pale. She glanced at the table with a wary expression, holding back the pain in her hands and tearing through the documents. Before she could finish reading them, she wanted to tear them apart. What does that mean? Jiang Tingyue pursed her lips and looked at Fu Nansheng. Io explained, your father's medical expenses will be fully paid by Mr. Fu. Of course, all expenses you have with Mr. Fu will also be paid by him. However, at the same time, you also need to fulfill your corresponding obligations. The specific content is on the second page. Jiang Tingyue flipped to the second page, where all the rules and regulations were imposed on her. In other words, she was a lover who, as a wealthy owner, offered a clearly marked price and demand for her pet that she had spent money on. This is not an agreement, it's just a humiliation. Let her truly understand that she is a plaything that can be called and played with, and she has no right to say no. Signed, Fu Nansheng instructed in a concise manner. Jiang Tingyue raised her eyes and her lips moved as she said, you came early in the morning to ask me to sign this, and you spared no effort in humiliating me. Fu Nansheng, what have I done to make you treat me like this? So it seems that you have really worked hard in those 3 years. The person you like is Qin Rou. Since that's the case, why don't you marry her? You have to entangle yourself with me here. Did you finish speaking? Once you finish speaking, sign. Fu Nansheng had no expression. Seeing her still hesitating, Fu Nansheng lacked patience and said, Jiang Tingyue, my time is precious. Deadline. Jiang Tingyue looked at him, you have to give me hope. One day when you're tired, maybe I'll let you go. After all, there is still no deadline, and this contract is a humiliating treaty. Io handed over his pen and Jiang Tingyue signed it gracefully. She is already like this, with only one life left. Fu Nansheng will do whatever he likes to do. Io looked at the signature and then left the ward with the document. Fu Nansheng stood up and walked towards Jiang Tingyue with a tall body, lifting her chin. She looked thin and weak in her loose hospital uniform, weak and pitiful. Why can't we let you go? Fu Nansheng rubbed her chin with his fingertips, his eyes showing a hint of indifference. Perhaps you're too stupid, hopelessly stupid. Jiang Tingyue patted his hand and became angry. If I were smarter, I wouldn't have been calculated like this by you. Fu Nansheng, if you still have some human nature, just leave me alone and be quiet. Jiang Tingyue didn't want to see him, but he broke her face again. Her enlarged handsome face leaned forward and a kiss fell on her lips, but it wasn't gentle. He went crazy again. Jiang Tingyue pushed him with the injection hand, but for him it was just a tickle. His breath wrapped around her, leaving her nowhere to hide. Jiang Tingyue was embraced by him and deepened the kiss, creating a contrast between her petite stature and his tall figure. She bit through his lips directly. Fu Nansheng withdrew and pinched her cheek, are you a dog? Jiang Tingyue scolded and said, get out. He touched his lips with his fingertips and felt blood. There were red marks on both sides of her face, and with just a little effort, she became extremely spoiled. Fu Nansheng disliked her spoiled behavior the most, he didn't want a porcelain doll. Why, I just signed the agreement and forgot so quickly. Jiang Tingyue pretended to be deaf and mute, and Fu Nansheng had some ways to treat her. In the future, print it out and put it in the waterfront villa for you to always remember, how about that? Jiang Tingyue widened her eyes in disbelief, but he had no intention of joking. He just looked at her coldly, waiting for her to compromise. Mrs. Chen came in with a thermos box and didn't notice the tense atmosphere between the two. Mr. Fu, you're also here. I just made breakfast, so why don't you have some together? Miss Jiang, these are all your favorite foods today. Mrs. Chen placed Chinese breakfast on the small table on the bed one by one. There is also milk, which is also hot. Please drink it quickly. Mrs. Chen held a cup to Jiang Tingyue's lips, making it convenient for her to drink. Fu Nansheng remained calm in his eyes and said, does she have no hands or is she disabled? Do you need to personally feed her? Miss Jiang's hands. Jiang Tingyue took the cup and placed it heavily on the table, with a look of not intending to eat. Mr. Fu, Miss Jiang's hand has undergone surgery and it is not advisable to hold anything that is too heavy. Mrs. Chen's eyes were full of heartache. Miss Jiang drank some soup last night and vomited it in the middle of the night. If she continues like this, how will her body recover? Fu Nansheng frowned and didn't say anything. Mrs. Chen, you don't have to tell him these things. He's not happy with me. Whatever I do is wrong, why explain? Jiang Tingyue asked Mrs. Chen to withdraw breakfast, as she didn't want to eat. Miss Jiang, how much do you want to eat, or what do you want to eat? I'll make it for you when I go back. Jiang Tingyue pulled the blanket and lay down, closing her eyes to catch her sleep. Fu Nansheng lifted her blanket and said, "Get up and have breakfast." "Don't eat." Jiang Tingyue lay on her side with her back to him. Fu Nansheng grabbed her arm and tried to pull her up. As they pulled, they touched the spot where she had received the injection. Jiang Tingyue screamed in pain and covered her hand, tears streaming down her face. I still pity the way she cries. Fu Nansheng, why don't you kill me? Fu Nansheng. End of this chapter. Chapter 7. Big fish will always take the hook. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 7. Big fish will always take the hook. Mrs. Chen quickly came out to make amends and said, Mr. Fu, have something to say. Miss Jiang has very few blood vessels on the back of her hand, and she also had several punctures last night before receiving the infusion. She was so weak that she couldn't even touch her now. Fu Nansheng felt annoyed and left the ward. Fu Nansheng walked out of the hospital, and the driver opened the rear car door. He bent over and sat in, while in the distance, Qin Rou tightly grasped the steering wheel. She looked up at the big words in the hospital and her mood plummeted. She just received a sneak photo sent by the nurse, which clearly shows Fu Nansheng and Jiang Tingyue. He is still entangled with Jiang Tingyue. No, it should be Jiang Tingyue seducing Sheng. What else can Jiang Tingyue not do when she uses the suicide tactic? She finally waited until they divorced, and this time, she will definitely not let Jiang Tingyue succeed. Qin Rou drove away from the hospital. Fu Nansheng was on a business trip and heard that it would take a month to come back. Jiang Tingyue was not only very happy, but as soon as he left, she felt that the air was sweet and there was a taste of freedom. Chen's sister-in-law always comes over on time to deliver 3 meals a day, cooking various delicious dishes to help her gain weight. Her wrist injury is slowly healing, but she still leaves an ugly scar. She always goes upstairs to see her father, but Jiang Jin shows no signs of waking up. He just sleeps like this, and Jiang Tingyue always stays in his ward for an afternoon, talking to him. On the day Jiang Tingyue was discharged from the hospital, Mrs. Chen specially came to pick her up. Miss Jiang, we can finally go home. Chen's sister-in-law helped her tidy up her clothes. Home. That's not her home, it's just a cage. Mr. Fu should also be back tonight. Jiang Tingyue was taken aback and said, Are you coming back tonight? Yes, Mr. Fu has been on a business trip for a month, and he hasn't been out for that long before. Jiang Tingyue couldn't be happy, only then did she feel a month of freedom. After he returned, she would never have it again. After a whole day, she was wilting. At night, she lay in bed tossing and turning, unable to sleep even when she was tired, her heart always hanging on until the sound of the car's engine came from the yard. Jiang Tingyue was so scared that she quickly closed her eyes and pretended to sleep, but her heart was about to jump out of her chest. When Fu Nansheng pushed the door into the master bedroom, the room was pitch black and he walked straight to the bathroom. Jiang Tingyue listened to the sound of water in the bathroom and clenched her hands on the blanket. In the darkness, her voice would be infinitely amplified by her senses. The sound of water stopped, and then the bathroom door was pulled open. Jiang Tingyue lay on her side with her back to him, motionless. Fu Nansheng wiped her wet hair, and the phone on the bedside table vibrated and lit up. He bent down to pick up the phone, and saw the lump on the big bed moving under the dim light. He curled his lips and took his phone to the balcony to answer. Jiang Tingyue was too nervous, and her stiff body relaxed. His voice came faintly from the balcony, not very real, but he could still hear every word. She begged him to leave after listening to the phone, but God must have ignored her hope. After speaking for a while, Fu Nansheng came in, followed by rustling sounds. The blanket was lifted, and a hot male body approached her. She closed her eyes tightly and dared not move, as a large hand landed on the soft flesh around her waist. What can he change by dressing so tightly to prevent him? His hands gradually moved upwards, and the breath he exhaled all fell on the back of her neck, her body, and he developed it so skillfully that he could drive a light car. Jiang Tingyue turned around and pressed her hands against his chest, her words becoming incoherent as she spoke. My injury is just right. Can you? Puzzling. The man lit a cigarette and was topless. Cough, cough. Jiang Tingyue coughed and buried her face under the blanket. Fu Nansheng bit the cigarette and turned his eyes to look at her, perhaps feeling happy both physically and mentally. He mercifully extinguished the cigarette in the ashtray. I want to go to work. Jiang Tingyue buried her face in the blanket, her voice weak. Speak louder. Jiang Tingyue pulled down the blanket, her voice still soft and soft. I want to go to work. I learned a bit smarter this time and understood how to negotiate terms afterwards, but Fu Nansheng had no intention of agreeing. Jiang Tingyue rolled over wrapped in a blanket and repeated it to him. This matter cannot be discussed. Why? Forgot your responsibilities. As the words fell, Jiang Tingyue suddenly approached and kissed him. She leaned against his lips and spoke in a soft and sweet voice, how can we agree? Fu Nansheng pressed against the back of her neck and lifted her to his arms, igniting the remaining charm in the bedroom once again. Jiang Tingyue originally thought it would be worth it if she could make him nod and agree at a loss, but this man refused to admit it and left when she was sleeping soundly. Jiang Tingyue slept until noon, her messy bed revealing the absurdity of last night. She raised her hand to her forehead and caught a glimpse of a Buddhist bead bracelet on her wrist. The beads emitted a delicate light, covering her scars. This Buddha bead bracelet seems to be tailor-made for her, the size is just right, she can't even take it off if she wants to. She tried several times but couldn't take it off. When did you put it on for her? Jiang Tingyue has no impression at all. Knock and knock. Mrs. Chen knocked on the door and tentatively asked, Miss Jiang, are you awake? Wake up, I'll come down immediately. Jiang Tingyue didn't care about the Buddha bead necklace anymore. She wrapped herself in a blanket and got out of bed to wash up in the bathroom. Looking in the mirror, she was stunned, with several kissing marks on her neck. Damn Fu Nansheng, he belongs to the dog, right? In the CEO's office, Qin Rou was staring at Fu Nansheng's neck with a nail scratch, and today he rarely buttoned his shirt to the top one. The jewelry design of the prosperous era must have retained its own characteristics. You are too gorgeous, too messy, and the details still need to be simplified. Fu Nansheng returned the design draft to Qin Rou, but she didn't respond. He raised his eyes and rolled his Adam apple up and down. What's the matter, you're absent-minded. You didn't go back to Yunlin Villa last night. I don't like to talk about personal matters during working hours. Fu Nansheng put the design draft in front of her, lowered his head, and continued working. Please make the necessary changes and show them to me as soon as possible. Qin Rou angrily took the design manuscript and left. Io was pushing the door in and saw Qin Rou's eyes turn red. Io walked in as if nothing had happened and began to report, Mr. Fu, we have investigated all the people related to Jiang Jin, but we have not found any abnormalities. He attached a list and continued, if Jiang Jin really left assets for Miss Jiang overseas, it's impossible to leave no trace. Fu Nansheng leaned back in his chair, pondering, with Jiang Jin's temperament, it's impossible not to leave Jiang Tingyue with a way out. Perhaps it's under someone else's name. In that case, it would be very difficult to find out. Don't check for now. With Jiang Tingyue as bait, big fish will always take the bait. Yes. Io also noticed the marks on Fu Nansheng's neck. He hesitated whether to remind him or not, but after careful consideration, he still reminded him, Mr. Fu, do you need to apply a bandage to your neck wound? Fu Nansheng remembered Jiang Tingyue's claws last night, and his eyes darkened a bit. The harder he exerted, the harder she grabbed. It's obvious. A bit, Io answered truthfully. Bring one over. Yes. After Qin Rou entered the office, she threw the design draft to the ground and swept everything off the desktop. He stayed overnight at the waterfront villa last night. There are still traces of ambiguity on my body. Qin Rou could no longer calm down, she carried her bag and went out. End of this chapter. Chapter 8. You are different from her. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 8. You are different from her. Jiang Tingyue was sitting on the sofa in the living room, with a laptop on her lap. She found several dance troupes and felt that they were all very good. She revised her resume and sent them one by one. A hurried doorbell rang from the villa, and Mrs. Chen was watering the flowers in the backyard. Jiang Tingyue could only personally open the door. As soon as the door opened, a slap accidentally brushed against Jiang Tingyue's cheek, with a loud and heavy bang. Jiang Tingyue, why are you so lowly? Qin Rou stared at her, and when she saw the mark on her neck that could not be blocked by foundation make-up, she gritted her teeth. You've all been kicked out of the house and chased to seduce Ah Sheng. You're so shameless, it really broadens my horizons. Jiang Tingyue looked at Qin Rou's uncontrollable appearance and smiled like a fairy. Why don't you think about it? He would rather come to sleep than touch you. You. Also, don't be so vulgar and seductive just by keeping your mouth shut. Speaking of this, how can you be so skilled? Didn't you also secretly spend time with Fu Nansheng before? Where can you be so noble? Jiang Tingyue gradually chuckled. Thieves shout to catch thieves, don't you feel guilty? Qin Rou raised her hand and wanted to hit her. Jiang Tingyue grabbed her wrist and completely turned cold. If you have something to do, go find Fu Nansheng. Don't act wild with me. Jiang Tingyue shook off her hand, and Qin Rou's angry eyes widened wide. You understand that you are already an abandoned woman, and everything here does not belong to you. Then you have to ask Fu Nansheng, do I really have the qualifications to live here? Chen Sa heard the commotion and quickly came over from the backyard. Seeing Chen Sa, Qin Rou couldn't calm down at all. Miss Su. Mrs. Chen dared not look directly at Qin Rou. Jiang Tingyue didn't understand why Mrs. Chen was so afraid of her. Qin Rou bumped Jiang Tingyue's shoulder open and entered the door. She went upstairs directly, her hand resting on the handle of the master bedroom. Jiang Tingyue stood in front of her. You are not qualified to enter. Qin Rou's sharp gaze turned to Jiang Tingyue, move away. Why didn't Fu Nansheng explain to you that he stayed here last night? Even if you went in to see it, what would happen? Can you change the fact? Jiang Tingyue didn't understand where she came from, not to mention that this was originally her wedding house. Even if she didn't qualify to live now, it wasn't Qin Rou's turn to come here and make a fuss. Do you think I'm willing to stay here? If you can lock his body and mind and let him sleep with you, I thank you for not having time. Shut up. You shut up. Qin Rou seemed to have her tail hurt from being stepped on. If it weren't for you seducing Ah Sheng, he wouldn't have come to sleep with you. Jiang Tingyue's face turned red and angry when she saw such a big reaction. Why don't you go ask him, is it because he can't hold me down or if I seduce him? Qin Rou ignored her and was about to enter the master bedroom. Jiang Tingyue pushed her away, causing Qin Rou to stumble backwards. She stopped at the staircase and couldn't stand firm, leaning backwards. Jiang Tingyue quickly approached to grab her hand, but didn't catch it. Ah! Qin Rou rolled and fell to the ground, and Fu Nansheng came in from the villa and strode forward to pick up Qin Rou. Ah Sheng, it hurts so much, it hurts so much. Qin Rou huddled in his arms, and the blood from his forehead flowed down his cheeks. Jiang Tingyue stood at the staircase, staring blankly at all of this. Fu Nansheng looked up at the upstairs, her cold gaze intimidating her. Fu Nansheng picked up Qin Rou and walked outside. Chen Sa hurriedly went upstairs and grabbed Jiang Tingyue's hand. She found her hands cold and said, "Miss Jiang, are you okay?" "I didn't mean to." Jiang Tingyue lowered her eyelashes, feeling lost. "I didn't want to push her downstairs." It's okay, Mrs. Chen kept comforting her. Jiang Tingyue knew that Fu Nansheng would not let her go. Qin Rou didn't cry or make a fuss when she arrived at the hospital. The doctor helped her bandage the wound on her forehead and gave her a full-body examination. Fu Nansheng confirmed that she was not in any serious condition before allowing the doctor to go out. "I thought that if you divorced, you would draw a clear line with Jiang Tingyue, but you still got entangled with her." "Ah Sheng, you lied to me." Qin Rou's eyes were filled with tears. "You can consider overseas branches or further education." What? Qin Rou, I can spoil you, but it doesn't mean you can have no sense of propriety. Fu Nansheng's expression was warm. "If you can't accept it, I will make another arrangement for you." "Are you driving me away?" Qin Rou's tears fell. Upon seeing this face, Fu Nansheng finally had an exception. "I told you a long time ago that you are incomparable to Jiang Tingyue. Do you not believe in yourself, or do you not trust me?" "I believe you, but—" "No, but—" Fu Nansheng interrupted her. Qin Rou lowered her head and spoke in an aggrieved voice, "Then why did you have to sleep with her? Did I spend so much money to keep her in the villa?" Qin Rou pursed her lips and looked up, mustering the courage to speak, "I can do it too." Qin Rou was worried that he would refuse, so she threw herself into his arms, wrapped her hands around his waist, pressed her face against his chest, and then lifted her head to kiss his chin, anxiously unbuttoning his shirt. "The more urgent she is, the button won't come undone." Fu Nansheng held her hand and Qin Rou looked up at him. "You're different from her." Fu Nansheng hugged her to the bed, pulled the blanket over her, and Qin Rou grabbed his hand, eagerly asking him, "You don't want to touch me, but you can touch her." "Ah Sheng, what do you want me to think? Whenever I think of you spending time with her day and night, my heart hurts. She's just a lover, but you're not." Fu Nansheng lightly caressed her face, "That's the difference." Qin Rou leaned in his arms, deeply attached to him, "I understand." "Ah Sheng, as long as it's something you want to do, I will accompany you. As long as you have me in your heart, I am willing to do anything. Jiang Tingyue will one day fall into hell, and she just needs to wait for the opportunity to become Mrs. Fu." Thinking this way, Qin Rou didn't worry anymore. Jiang Tingyue originally wanted to run, but where could she go? Maybe she was found by that crazy man Fu Nansheng and tortured even more severely. Now Fu Nansheng is completely abnormal, she can't afford to provoke her. She was uneasy for a long time, and the night was already deep. Maybe he wouldn't come back to accompany Qin Rou in the hospital, so she didn't have to be so afraid. Jiang Tingyue went to the cloakroom to get her pajamas, took off her clothes, and was about to take a shower when the bathroom door was suddenly pushed open. She was so shocked that she blocked the view in front of her with her clothes. "Get out!" Jiang Tingyue hurriedly covered herself with clothes. Fu Nansheng tugged at his tie and slowly untied it. Jiang Tingyue wanted to run out, but he stopped her and wrapped her in his arms. She was as smooth as a mud loach. Fu Nansheng, let go of me. You are quite comfortable, and there is no guilt for hurting someone. Jiang Tingyue was stunned. He didn't ask her or listen to her explanation, so he had already concluded and charged her. Her heart tingled slightly, but there was a smile on her face. Qin Rou is acting wild here. Why should I get used to her? You treat her like a treasure, what do you have to do with me? End of this chapter. Chapter 9. Everything is a scam. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 9. Everything is a scam. Fu Nansheng pushed her to the wall and stared at her with a gloomy expression. You're just something I bought with a clear price tag. What right do you have to shout? He described it as something she only bought with money. Jiang Tingyue stared at him with an unyielding expression and said, I didn't mind if you guys and girls dirty my eyes. Fu Nansheng completely lowered his eyes and chuckled coldly, very good. The next second, Jiang Tingyue was thrown into the bathtub by him. Her mouth and nose were submerged in water, and she wanted to surface and breathe. However, Fu Nansheng held onto her neck and let her sink into the bathtub. Jiang Tingyue flapped her hands and scratched the back of his hand with her nails. Gollum, the water surface kept bubbling. Just as Jiang Tingyue felt like she was dying in the bathtub, she was picked up. She was disheveled, hands resting on the edge of the bathtub, breathing heavily and coughing violently. In those few seconds just now, she thought she was going to be killed by Fu Nansheng. She was very embarrassed, and Fu Nansheng looked at her high up and said, what should I not say? I know now. Jiang Tingyue's chin was lifted, and Fu Nansheng admired her fear, his gaze penetrating every part of her body inch by inch. The man who had a tough attitude just now is caressing her face lightly. A faint sob soon came from the bathroom. Her hand fell into the water, and the Buddha beads shone brightly in the water's light. Fu Nansheng was closely intertwined with her. Early in the morning, Fu Nansheng was getting dressed in the cloakroom, and when he was buttoning up, he noticed that she had dug out several nail marks on the back of his hand. He frowned. She keeps her nails so long to specifically pick at him, right? He dressed neatly and walked out of the cloakroom, with the woman on the bed with her back to him. Her long hair was draped around the pillow, and the smooth silk sheet slipped onto her slender waist, bringing back the enchanting memories of last night. Jiang Tingyue fits him very well and is extremely suitable in all aspects, that's all. Fu Nansheng went downstairs, and Mrs. Chen was preparing breakfast in the kitchen. Mr. Fu, should Miss Jiang's breakfast be served together? No need. Mrs. Chen brought out Fu Nansheng's breakfast and looked upstairs with a hint of concern in her eyes. Last night, she heard Miss Jiang's crying. Mr. Fu probably didn't hit Miss Jiang, right? No, Mr. Fu never hits Miss Jiang. So why is Miss Jiang crying? Alas, it's probably another argument. Fu Nansheng thought of something and said, let's boil medicine for her later. Mrs. Chen immediately realized that Miss Jiang's crying was due to that reason. She replied, okay, I'll go prepare now. When Jiang Tingyue woke up, her back was sore and she muttered to Fu Nansheng hundreds of times. When she got out of bed, her feet were weak and she almost fell. The red mark on her wrist had not disappeared yet, and she happened to step on the tie that tied her. Jiang Tingyue kicked it away, as if it was something dirty. She had a dry mouth and tongue, and went downstairs to drink water. As soon as she entered the kitchen, she happened to see Mrs. Chen pouring a package of things into a medicine can and boiling it, stirring it a few times with a spoon. The taste is very familiar. It is the tonic diet she has drunk before. Ah! Miss Jiang, Miss Jiang. Chen turned around and saw Jiang Tingyue, immediately putting her hands behind her back and stuttering nervously. Have you woken up? Drink water when you're thirsty. Jiang Tingyue walked to the refrigerator and picked up a bottle of mineral water, then went upstairs without any worries. Mrs. Chen patted her chest and let out a long sigh. After 20 minutes of cooking tonic diet, Mrs. Chen brought it to her, and Jiang Tingyue lay down in bed again. Miss Jiang, this is tonic diet. Get up and have a drink. Well, let's keep it, I'll have it later. The temperature is just right now. Why don't you drink while it's hot and I'll take it with me after finishing it? Jiang Tingyue opened her eyes and sat up to take Chen's bowl. Chen, I want to eat fruit, she said, then I'll go down and cut you a fruit platter. When Mrs. Chen walked out of the room, Jiang Tingyue got out of bed and poured tonic diet into the toilet, leaving some in the bag to hide. Mrs. Chen cut the fruit tray and noticed the empty bowl on the bedside table. Jiang Tingyue frowned and said, "This medicine is really bitter. Good medicine tastes bitter, please take some fruit." Chen's sister-in-law handed the fruit plate to Jiang Tingyue. Jiang Tingyue ate a strawberry and suddenly said, "Chen's sister-in-law, I want to go out today to see my dad." This. Jiang Tingyue suddenly lowered her head and wilted, "I just miss my dad. I want to go see him. I won't stay long, I'll be back soon." "Alright, I won't report to Mr. Fu." "Miss Jiang, you must come back before the evening," Mrs. Chen reminded repeatedly. Jiang Tingyue went to the hospital. After seeing Jiang Jin, she went to the laboratory to test the bag of tonic diet. She made an emergency and the test results came out 3 hours later. The doctor held the test report and explained, "This is a traditional Chinese medicine anti-pregnancy soup. Are you allergic to anti-pregnancy drugs?" Jiang Tingyue pursed her lips and said, "Yes." No wonder. The doctor gave her the test report. Nowadays, very few people drink this, and the effectiveness of avoiding pregnancy is not 100%. Jiang Tingyue looked at this test report and found it ironic and ridiculous. She had always wanted to be pregnant and was ready for pregnancy. Fu Nansheng kept making excuses and later agreed to have a baby. She was also full of joy in looking forward to the birth of the baby. He ordered Mrs. Chen to cook tonic diet for her to recuperate. All this was a hoax. She was like a clown, and he played her around. No wonder Fu Nansheng said she was stupid, she was really hopelessly foolish. In those 3 years, he had no sincerity towards her. Jiang Tingyue doesn't know how he left the hospital. He is missing a piece of his heart and is not complete in any way. All his sincerity and love have disappeared like a foam. Why do you treat her like this? Jiang Tingyue squatted on the ground and started crying. Mrs. Chen has been eagerly anticipating at the entrance of the villa, watching as time passes by minute by second. Mr. Fu is coming back soon. If Miss Jiang doesn't make it back, what will she do then? The phone calls I made have been unanswered. Just as Mrs. Chen was in a hurry, Jiang Tingyue returned and quickly stepped forward. "Miss Jiang." Jiang Tingyue bypassed Mrs. Chen and entered the villa, then went upstairs to return to the master bedroom. Mrs. Chen was about to go up and ask what was going on when Bentley drove into the villa courtyard and Fu Nansheng also came back. "Mr. Fu, you're back. Dinner is ready." According to tradition, Fu Nansheng would first go upstairs to change clothes. As soon as he entered the master bedroom, he saw her sitting on the balcony, and Fu Nansheng darkened his eyes. Jiang Tingyue's arm was pulled by him, and then he hugged her down. The next second, she was thrown onto the sofa. End of this chapter. Chapter 10. Don't Provoke Qin Rou. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 10. Don't Provoke Qin Rou. Jiang Tingyue was thrown dizzy and disoriented. As soon as she calmed down, she saw his gloomy face. "Why, it's not enough to see the scenery." Jiang Tingyue smiled nonchalantly and looked up at him. "I'm even more willing to die now than you are." Fu Nansheng stared at Jiang Tingyue's smirking face, expressionless. He knows very well what her thoughts are. He didn't bother her anymore and walked towards the bathroom with his tie loose. He didn't forget to tell her to get her pajamas. Jiang Tingyue put away a smile and wore a broken face. She reluctantly got up and went to the cloakroom. As she came out holding her pajamas, Fu Nansheng's phone placed by the bedside rang. She walked over to pick it up and saw Qin Rou's name flickering on her phone screen. Actually, Jiang Tingyue was quite puzzled. Fu Nansheng could have slept with Qin Rou, so why bother with her endlessly? She was lost in thought when her phone was taken away by a big hand. Fu Nansheng answered Qin Rou's phone in front of Jiang Tingyue, who looked up and met his gaze. His tone was very indulgent and gentle, just like how he used to treat her. Now, with this tenderness and favor, he has given it to another woman. Jiang Tingyue threw her pajamas onto the big bed and was about to leave when Fu Nansheng grabbed her bright white wrist and pulled her to his side. You obediently listened to the doctor's words, Fu Nansheng said to the other end of the phone, but his eyes fell on Jiang Tingyue's face. He patiently comforted him a few more words before hanging up. Jiang Tingyue didn't react much, and Fu Nansheng couldn't see any expression on her face. He warned, don't provoke Qin Rou. Then please keep an eye on her. If she doesn't know how to behave in front of me, I won't be polite. Jiang Tingyue couldn't hold back and could only let him grab her. Fu Nansheng only wrapped a towel around his lower body. He asked Jiang Tingyue to take care of him and dress, but Jiang Tingyue refused. Before she could escape from his embrace, she was pushed against the wall. As soon as she opened her lips, she was blocked by his kiss. He kissed very attentively, his handsome face was within reach, but Jiang Tingyue felt nauseous. Perhaps his mouth had kissed Qin Rou countless times. Fu Nansheng sensed her lack of concentration. He pulled away slightly and saw her with a reluctant expression and tightly pursed lips. Before he even bullied her, he put on this posture. He has no interest at all. I even know how to wag my tail to please me by spending a lot of money on a dog. He turned around and scolded her, and Jiang Tingyue retorted, then you should go and get intimate with the dog. Do you dare to talk to me like this now? Fu Nan's handsome face sulked. Jiang Tingyue sneered lightly, how dare you? I'm just a pastime for you. Since I'm a thing, I can only do whatever I want. Before she could finish speaking, Fu Nansheng walked downstairs until he changed his clothes in the cloakroom. Jiang Tingyue slid down the wall and fell to the ground, his tense body finally feeling relieved at this moment. Chen's sister Law saw that Jiang Tingyue had not come downstairs for a long time, and she was not at ease, so she went upstairs to take a look. Miss Jiang, are you okay? Mrs. Chen saw Jiang Tingyue sitting on the ground. The ground is cold, get up quickly. Jiang Tingyue remained motionless, her beautiful face almost numb. Sister Chen, I want to stay by myself for a while. Mrs. Chen hesitated to speak, sighed slightly, and then left the room, closing the door. Immediately, the room heard faint cries and swallows. Io drove around the car several times, wanting to speak up, but seeing the expression on the man's face in the back seat, he thought he might as well go around. Can't walk out of the waterfront villa after driving for half a day. The man's displeased voice echoed from the back seat. Mr. Fu, where do you want to go? Fu Nansheng's tone was not good. Yunlin Villa. Io silently turned the steering wheel, the car turned into the lane, and a car closely followed in the rearview mirror. Io accelerated his speed and changed lanes again, and the vehicles behind him closely followed. Turn right. Fu Nansheng calmly ordered, and Io stepped on the accelerator and quickly changed lanes. Subsequently, Io shuttled among numerous vehicles, distancing himself from the vehicles behind him. At the intersection of traffic lights, he urgently turned the steering wheel and drove in the opposite direction. The vehicles behind him had no time to brake and collided directly with the opposite vehicle. Not long after, they kept up again. Mr. Fu, it seems that the other party has come prepared, said Io with a cold expression on his face. Fu Nansheng lowered his eyes and said, turn around and collide. Yes. Bentley tires made a piercing and sharp sound as they rubbed against the ground, with a loud bang. The vehicle opposite slipped the steering wheel and crashed straight into a tree, causing the car to sink into the tree and deform completely. Io parked steadily and turned around, saying, Mr. Fu, are you okay? Fu Nansheng pushed open the car door and walked towards the car. The man inside the car hung his head down, and the glass pierced his heart, causing blood to flow. Little beggar in the red area who begged for food and no one wanted it. There is a mobile phone in the back seat, and the screen keeps flashing, repeating a segment of audio. Little beggar in the red area who begged for food and no one wanted it. Io quickly stepped forward and turned it off. There was no information on his phone, only this audio segment. It seemed like everything was designed. It seems that there are still some fish that missed the net, Fu Nansheng said with a cold look at Io. Io knew he was not doing well, so he lowered his head and said, I will find out this person as soon as possible. Puzzling. Fu Nansheng opened the lighter, and the flames shone on his expressionless handsome face. He threw the lighter into the car and soon it ignited a raging fire. Io also threw his phone in, and Fu Nansheng spoke coldly and fiercely, he must die. Ah! Jiang Tingyue was awakened by a nightmare. Her face was covered in sweat, and as she turned her head, the sun was already shining brightly outside the window. Last night, she cried and fell asleep on the bed. She was the only one in the big bed, and Fu Nansheng didn't come back last night. With a clang, her phone rang. Jiang Tingyue took it over and saw that she had replied to the resume she had submitted. A dance troupe hoped that she could send a dance video. The haze of the nightmare just now swept away, and Jiang Tingyue looked at the text message repeatedly, finally showing a smile. Great, finally succeeded in the first step. Jiang Tingyue immediately got out of bed and ran barefoot to the cloakroom. She found her dance clothes and prepared to record a video, but the Buddha beads on her wrist were very eye-catching. She could never wear this string of Buddhist beads to record a video. Jiang Tingyue tried to take it off, but the size of the Buddha bead was just right and there was no extra space. She tried many methods, but still couldn't take it off. She could only go downstairs and ask for Chen's help, but soon Jiang Tingyue shouted loudly. Ah, it hurts, it hurts. Mrs. Chen stopped and noticed that the back of her hand had turned red. Miss Jiang, I really can't take it off, why don't we just forget about it? No way. Jiang Tingyue frowned, I have to pick it up today. This Buddha bead has a translucent color, and it looks very nice on you. Don't do it. Jiang Tingyue doesn't know where Fu Nansheng bought the ghost thing, why is it so difficult to pick? Chen's sister-in-law tried a few more times, but still couldn't take it off. She said, why don't you ask Mr. Fu? It's not a solution to take it this way. The back of your hand is red, and if you continue to do it, you'll have to scratch the skin. End of this chapter.